The moment I stepped into the Meridian Gallery, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary Friday night. The space hummed with energy, conversations floating between abstract sculptures, wine glasses clinking beneath impressionist landscapes, and the soft ambient music weaving through it all like an invisible thread connecting everyone in the room. The lighting was perfect, not the harsh spotlight you'd expect, but a warm, golden glow that made even the most modern pieces feel somehow timeless and inviting. I remember thinking how the gallery itself felt like an artwork. The way the exhibits were arranged created this natural flow that guided visitors from one emotional experience to the next. I've always had a complicated relationship with art galleries. Growing up in a small town where art meant the annual craft fair at the community center, these sophisticated urban spaces initially intimidated me. My first gallery visit as a college freshman left me feeling like an imposter, nodding thoughtfully at paintings I didn't understand while eavesdropping on conversations to pick up the proper terminology. But over time, I developed a genuine appreciation for these spaces, not just for the art they contained, but for the way they allowed people to connect over shared experiences of beauty, confusion, or provocation. That night at the Meridian, I wasn't looking for anything beyond a few hours of aesthetic appreciation and perhaps some inspiration for my own modest creative pursuits. I'd come alone, as I often did, preferring the freedom to linger before pieces that spoke to me without worrying about boring a companion. I was standing before a particularly striking mixed media piece, a swirl of deep blues and unexpected textures that seemed to pull you in like the center of a whirlpool, when I felt someone's presence beside me. It makes you feel like you're drowning, but in the most beautiful way possible. A voice said, low and melodic. I turned to find myself looking into the most expressive brown eyes I'd ever seen. They belonged to a man about my height, with an easy smile and a posture that suggested complete comfort in this environment. He wore a simple black button-down that contrasted with the colorful beaded bracelet on his wrist, something handmade and personal amid the carefully curated gallery atmosphere. That's exactly it, I replied, surprised by how perfectly he'd articulated my own thoughts. I've been standing here trying to figure out why I can't walk away from it. His name was Elliot, I would soon learn. He had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but naturally drew it anyway. Thoughtful, with a quiet confidence that made every word seem carefully chosen. We moved together to the next piece, a conversation already flowing between us as naturally as if we'd known each other for years rather than minutes. We'd made our way through nearly half the gallery, our commentary evolving from polite observations to increasingly personal interpretations, when we reached a small alcove featuring a series of portrait photographs. The artist had captured people in moments of unguarded emotion, joy, contemplation, wonder, against backdrops of ordinary urban settings. I was studying a particularly moving image of an elderly man feeding pigeons, his face alight with simple pleasure, when I felt Elliot's hand gently touch my elbow. "Come with me for a second," he said, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "There's something you need to see." Before I could respond, he was guiding me behind a temporary wall that separated the photography exhibit from the next installation. The space was semi-private, a transitional area between exhibits that few other patrons had discovered. A single small painting hung there, easily overlooked in the grand scheme of the gallery, but striking in its simplicity. It was a frame within a frame, a trompe-l'oeil that played with perception and reality. "This is why I wanted to bring you here," Elliot said, his voice softer now that we were standing close in this hidden corner. His eyes moved from the painting to my face, studying me with the same intensity I'd been giving the artwork. "Your face belongs in a frame like this. The way you look at art, completely present, holding nothing back. It's its own kind of masterpiece." The compliment caught me completely off guard. In that moment, I became acutely aware of several things simultaneously. The warmth spreading across my cheeks, the subtle scent of Elliot's cologne, the fact that we were standing much closer than gallery etiquette typically allowed, and most surprisingly, that I didn't mind any of it. I'd never thought of myself as particularly striking. I was the person who appreciated beauty rather than embodied it. Yet the way he looked at me made me momentarily see myself through his eyes, and it was disorienting in the most exhilarating way. "That's quite a line," I managed to say, attempting to deflect with humor while I regained my composure. Do you use it on all the gallery goers you kidnap behind exhibits? He laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Only the ones who look at a piece for more than 30 seconds. It's my very scientific method for finding people worth talking to. His expression grew more serious. But no, I don't make a habit of this. There's something about the way you engage with the art. It's refreshing. Most people here tonight are more interested in being seen than in seeing. Let me explain why this moment mattered so much. In a world where dating often feels like a carefully choreographed dance of app swipes and calculated text messages, there was something almost rebelliously old-fashioned about this encounter. It was unplanned, unfiltered, and based on a genuine shared interest rather than an algorithm suggestion. As we emerged from behind the exhibit and continued our tour of the gallery, something had shifted between us. A private understanding had formed, a connection that felt both thrilling and comfortable. Our conversation flowed from the exhibits around us to broader discussions about creativity and expression. Elliot, I learned, was a curator at a smaller gallery across town, specializing in emerging artists who worked with sustainable materials. His passion for art wasn't just professional. He spoke about certain pieces with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious experiences. I told him about my work as a graphic designer, how I constantly straddled the line between commercial demands and creative integrity. "What's your favorite piece here tonight?" he asked as we paused before a large abstract canvas dominated by bold red strokes against a textured white background. I considered for a moment, then led him back to a small watercolor we'd passed earlier. A simple scene of rain-slicked city streets reflecting neon signs, the kind of ordinary moment transformed into something magical through the artist's perspective. "This one," I said. "It reminds me of walking home from the bus stop when I was in college. There was this stretch of road that looked exactly like this after a rain, and sometimes I'd stop just to watch the lights shimmer on the wet pavement. It was this perfect moment of beauty in the middle of stress and deadlines and figuring out who I was supposed to be." Elliot nodded slowly, looking at the painting with renewed interest. "That's what great art does. It validates those small moments we might otherwise dismiss as insignificant." He turned to me. "I have a memory like that too. Summer evenings at my grandparents' farm, when the fireflies would come out. My cousins would run around trying to catch them in jars, but I just wanted to watch them appear and disappear in the darkness. My grandfather found me sitting alone on the porch steps one night, and instead of telling me to join the others, he just sat down beside me. 'Some things are better left free,' he said. I think that's when I first understood what it meant to appreciate beauty without needing to possess it. There was something deeply intimate about exchanging these memories, these small, formative moments that we carried with us. As we continued through the gallery, our personal stories became intertwined with our interpretations of the art, each revelation bringing us closer. I found myself sharing things I rarely discussed with new acquaintances, my complicated relationship with my father, who never understood my creative pursuits, the year I nearly abandoned design altogether after a particularly harsh critique, the quiet satisfaction I found in creating work that spoke to people on an emotional level. Elliot listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly engaging with my stories rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. When our hands accidentally brushed as we both reached for a gallery guide, neither of us pulled away immediately. The brief contact sent a current of awareness through me, and I noticed the slight catch in his breath that suggested he'd felt it too. "Would you like to get some air?" he asked after we'd completed a full circuit of the gallery. "There's a small courtyard in the back with a sculpture garden. It's usually quieter than in here." The courtyard was indeed peaceful, illuminated by subtle landscape lighting that cast gentle shadows across the stone pathways. A few other patrons wandered among the sculptures, but it felt like we had entered a different world from the buzzing energy of the main gallery. We found a bench partially hidden by the sweeping branches of a Japanese maple, its leaves creating a canopy of dappled shadows above us. As we sat down, I realized how much I'd been enjoying Elliot's company, how easily conversation flowed between us, how attentively he listened, how his observations often made me see things from a fresh perspective. There was an undeniable attraction building, but it was more than physical. It was the rare pleasure of finding someone who seemed to understand parts of me I usually kept hidden. But with that realization came a familiar anxiety. I'd been down this road before. meeting someone who seemed perfect, allowing myself to get excited about the possibilities, only to discover incompatibilities or watch interest fade as quickly as it had appeared. And then there were the complications of my own life, my demanding job, my reluctance to make myself vulnerable after my last relationship had ended painfully. Was I ready to open myself up to that potential again? Did I even know how anymore? You went somewhere else just now, Elliot observed, his voice gentle. Your expression changed. I hesitated, unsure how honest to be. I was just thinking about how unexpected tonight has been. I came here just wanting to see some interesting art, and instead, you got cornered by a presumptuous stranger who pulled you behind an exhibit. He finished with a self-deprecating smile. I hope you know you could have told me to get lost at any point. That's not what I was going to say, I assured him. I was going to say that instead, I had one of the most genuine conversations I've had in a long time. But, I paused, debating whether to continue. But, he prompted gently. But I'm also feeling a little cautious, I admitted. Connections like this, they don't happen often, at least not for me. And that makes me both excited and nervous. Elliot nodded, seeming to understand exactly what I wasn't saying. I know what you mean. When something feels promising, there's always the fear of ruining it by expecting too much too soon. He looked down at his hands for a moment before meeting my eyes again. For what it's worth, I feel the same way. This evening has been unexpected in the best possible way. Our conversation was interrupted by the gallery assistant announcing that the exhibit would be closing in 15 minutes. The reminder of the outside world broke the intimate bubble we'd created, and I felt a sudden panic at the thought of the evening ending. Would we exchange numbers? Would this connection survive beyond the magical context of the gallery? I should probably start heading out, I said reluctantly, standing from the bench. Elliot rose too, and for a moment we stood facing each other, the unspoken question of what happened next hanging between us. Can I walk you out? He asked. As we made our way back through the now thinning crowd in the gallery, I felt a sudden distance opening between us. The easy flow of conversation had been replaced by a slightly awkward silence, both of us perhaps realizing that we were approaching a decision point. By the time we reached the main entrance, I had convinced myself that the connection I'd felt had been exaggerated by the romantic setting and my own loneliness. It was really nice meeting you, I said as we paused on the gallery steps, the words sounding painfully inadequate even to my own ears. Thank you for showing me your perspective on the exhibits. Thank you for sharing yours, Elliot replied, his expression difficult to read in the dim light outside the gallery. He seemed about to say something more, then stopped himself. Have a good night. I nodded, disappointed but unsurprised. This was how these things usually ended, a pleasant interaction that remained just that, a moment in time without continuation. I turned to leave, already mentally rehearsing how I described the evening to my friends, emphasizing the interesting art rather than the interesting man to avoid their well-meaning but tiresome encouragement to put myself out there more. I had taken only a few steps when I heard Elliot call my name. I turned back to find him still standing where I'd left him, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I'm sorry, he said, closing the distance between us. I'm not usually this indecisive, but I keep second-guessing myself. The truth is, I don't want this evening to be just a nice memory. I'd like to see you again, properly, not just because we happened to be in the same gallery on the same night. The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming. I'd like that too, I admitted. There's an installation opening next weekend at my gallery, he said, his confidence seemingly restored by my response. The artist uses light and shadow to create these incredible immersive environments. Would you want to come? I could give you a behind-the-scenes tour. That sounds perfect, I replied, unable to keep the smile from my voice. We exchanged phone numbers, the momentary awkwardness completely dissolved. As I finally turned to leave, this time with concrete plans for seeing him again, Elliot called out once more. Hey, he said, remember that painting I showed you? The frame within a frame? I nodded, curious where he was going with this. The artist who created it has a philosophy that I've always loved. She believes that frames don't just contain art. They're an invitation to look closer, to pay attention to what might otherwise be overlooked. His eyes held mine. I meant what I said earlier. The way you see the world deserves to be framed, highlighted, celebrated. In that moment, standing on the gallery steps with the night spread out before us, I felt something shift inside me, a willingness to be seen that I hadn't allowed myself in longer than I could remember. The wall I'd built around myself didn't come crashing down all at once, but a door had definitely opened. The week that followed was filled with text messages and one long phone call that stretched into the early hours of the morning. We discovered more common interests, a shared love for obscure indie films, similar tastes in music, the same favorite breakfast spot in the city, though we'd never crossed paths there. But more importantly, we continued the honest exchange that had begun at the gallery, sharing thoughts and experiences with a freedom that felt both exhilarating and slightly terrifying. By the time the night of the installation opening arrived, I felt as though I'd known Elliot much longer than a week. I arrived at his gallery, a converted warehouse space with exposed brick walls and soaring ceilings, with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The crowd was smaller and more eclectic than at the Meridian, with an atmosphere that felt less formal and more experimental. Elliot spotted me almost immediately, his face lighting up in a way that instantly calmed my nerves. He was in his element here, greeting artists and patrons with easy familiarity while somehow making me feel like the most important person in the room. He introduced me to colleagues and friends, his hand occasionally finding the small of my back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "Come on," he said after we'd made the rounds. "Let me show you the main installation before it gets too crowded." He led me through a black curtain into a space that had been transformed into something otherworldly. Light projections created shifting landscapes across the walls and floor, responding to movement and sound in the room. As we walked through the space, our presence altered the patterns around us, creating unique constellations of light that followed our path. "It's interactive," Elliot explained, his voice hushed in the darkened room. "The artist programmed it to create a unique experience for each visitor. No two people will see exactly the same thing." We spent nearly an hour in that room, experimenting with different movements and watching how the light responded. At one point, Elliot took my hand and spun me slowly, creating a spiral of golden light that expanded outward from where we stood. The simple joy of that moment, playing with light like children while surrounded by serious art appreciators, created an intimacy that felt both playful and profound. Later, after the official opening had ended and most guests had departed, Elliot and I sat on a bench in the now quiet gallery, sharing a bottle of wine that had survived the event. "Thank you for tonight," I said, meaning it sincerely. "Seeing you here, in your space, doing what you love, it was special." "I was nervous, actually," he admitted, surprising me. "I wanted you to like it here, to like the people I work with, the kind of art we showcase." "Why would you be nervous about that?" He was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "Because I already knew I liked you, a lot, and I wanted our worlds to be compatible." He looked up at me. "That first night at the Meridian, when I saw you looking at that blue mixed media piece, you were so completely absorbed in it. I watched you for probably 5 minutes before I worked up the courage to say something. There was something about your focus, your openness to the experience, that I found incredibly attractive." "So pulling me behind the art exhibit was premeditated?" I teased, though I was touched by his confession. He laughed. "Not exactly. That was impulse. But approaching you wasn't." His expression grew more serious. "I don't usually do that, you know. Talk to strangers at galleries. Despite working in this field, I'm actually pretty reserved." "I wouldn't have guessed that," I said truthfully. "You seemed so confident." "With you, it was easy to be," he replied. Something just clicked. The conversation paused as we both absorbed the implications of what he was saying, what we were both feeling. We were no longer just two people who'd had an interesting evening at a gallery. We were actively choosing to pursue whatever was developing between us. "Can I ask you something?" Elliot said after a moment. "That night at the Meridian, when we were saying goodbye, you seemed to pull back suddenly. What happened?" I took a deep breath, deciding to be completely honest. I've been hurt before, pretty badly. And I've spent the last couple of years convincing myself that I'm fine on my own, that connections like this are rare and probably temporary anyway. So when I felt myself starting to really like you, my instinct was to protect myself. I gave him a rueful smile. I was already rehearsing how I'd tell the story to my friends without sounding disappointed. "And now," he asked quietly. "Now I'm trying something different," I said. "I'm trying to stay present in this, whatever it is, without fast-forwarding to all the ways it might end badly." Elliot reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "I like that approach," he said, being present. "And for what it's worth, I don't think this is temporary." The weeks that followed proved him right. We fell into a rhythm together, discovering the everyday details of each other's lives alongside the deeper truths we continued to share. I learned that Elliot was meticulously organized in his professional life, but charmingly absent-minded about personal matters. He discovered my habit of reading the endings of books first, a quirk he found both baffling and endearing. We had our first disagreement over a film he loved that I found pretentious, and our first makeup after I admitted that perhaps I hadn't given it a fair chance. 3 months after our first meeting, Elliot invited me to collaborate on a community project his gallery was launching, workshops for local high school students interested in careers in the arts. I designed the promotional materials while he organized the curriculum, our professional skills complementing each other in ways that strengthened both the project and our relationship. The night of the first workshop, watching Elliot guide a group of teenagers through an exercise in perspective drawing, I was struck by how far we'd come from that chance encounter at the Meridian. The man who had pulled me behind an exhibit to tell me my face belonged in a frame was now a central part of my life, someone whose presence I had come to rely on and cherish. After the students had left, buzzing with excitement about their projects, Elliot found me in the gallery office where I'd been finalizing some details for the next session. "I have something for you," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. He handed me a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden frame, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. But instead of containing a photograph or artwork, it framed a tiny mirror. "I know it's a bit on the nose," Elliot said with a self-conscious laugh, "but I wanted you to see what I see when I look at you. Not just your physical appearance, though I obviously find that pretty spectacular." His eyes held mine with an intensity that still made my heart race. "I see someone whose perspective transforms ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. Someone who frames the world in a way that reveals its beauty and complexity." I held the small framed mirror, understanding the symbolism behind his gift. It wasn't about vanity or appearance. It was about perception and reflection, how we see ourselves, how others see us, and how those views shape our understanding of the world. "Thank you," I said, emotion making my voice slightly unsteady. "For this, and for everything else. For pulling me behind that exhibit and changing the course of my life." "I think we changed each other's course," he replied, drawing me close. And I couldn't be more grateful for that detour. 6 months after our first meeting, we returned to the Meridian Gallery for a new exhibit. The space felt both familiar and different. The same elegant architecture and careful curation, but now infused with the shared history of our beginning. We found ourselves standing before a new installation in the exact spot where Elliot had first approached me. "Do you remember what you said to me here?" I asked him, leaning into his side as we contemplated the artwork before us. "Something embarrassingly forward about your face belonging in a frame, I believe," he replied with a grin. "It was the best pickup line I've ever heard," I assured him, "though I'm still not convinced you didn't use it on gallery goers regularly. Only the ones who looked at art for more than 30 seconds. He reminded me, repeating his joke from that first night. Then his expression grew more serious. "But the truth is, I'd never said anything like that to anyone before. Something about you made me brave or reckless." "I'm glad for either," I said, turning to face him fully, because that moment changed everything for me. It wasn't just about the compliment. It was about being truly seen by someone who understood what mattered to me. As we continued through the gallery, hand in hand, I reflected on how appropriate it was that our relationship had begun in this place dedicated to perspective and perception. Art galleries are spaces where we're invited to see differently, to consider new viewpoints and possibilities. Elliot had offered me that same invitation, to see myself through his eyes, to consider the possibility of a connection I hadn't been looking for but desperately needed. The frame he'd given me now sat on my desk at home, a daily reminder that beauty exists not just in what we see, but in how we see it. And sometimes, the most extraordinary masterpieces are the connections we form when we're brave enough to step behind the exhibit, to venture into those unexpected spaces where genuine human connection can flourish. In the end, perhaps that was the most valuable lesson I'd learned from that night at the Meridian. That love, like art, asks us to be fully present, to engage with open hearts and minds, and to recognize the masterpieces that exist not just on gallery walls, but in the frames of our everyday lives. Total_char_count, 18,785.